Bravery to me means that you are brave in the face of fear and uncertainty and change. Because the deal is, we are all afraid. That's not some personal failing. That's not some unusual thing. We're all afraid. And there's one of our astronauts, Buzz Aldrin, says bravery is the gradual accumulation of discipline. So it's a capability. And what that also says is all of us can be brave. You can be brave, I can be brave, anyone listening can be brave. My own journey was to really find out why I wanted to be brave. And in my case, I signed up to be a federal prosecutor where you every day are standing up for crime victims. And so I really put myself in a position where I had to be brave, but I wanted to be brave because it was so important to stand up for them and be their voice and also to guide them through the process of testifying in a criminal case, which is a very scary thing.
Hello and welcome to episode 231 of the Quiet and Strong podcast, especially for introverts. I'm your host, David Hall, and the creator of quietandstrong.com. This is a weekly podcast dedicated to understanding the strengths and needs of introverts, along with strategies for success. Introversion is not something to fix, but to be embraced. Normally, we will air each episode on a Monday. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite platform. Leave a review or a rating. That would mean a lot to me and also help others find the show. Tell a friend about the podcast and help get the word out there that introversion is a beautiful thing. Jim Moorhead is a keynote speaker, Fortune 500 crisis advisor, and the author of Instant Survivor, Right Ways to Respond When Things Go Wrong. With experiences as an assistant U.S. attorney, Goldman Sachs investment banker, and law firm partner, he helps leaders navigate uncertainty, spark innovation, and build cultures where employees are empowered to share their best ideas. All right. Well, welcome to the Quiet and Strong podcast, Jim. Jim, it's so good to have you on today.
Fantastic to be here and impressed that you're up so early where you are.
Yeah, I'm an early riser. So, we're going to get into the work you do around bravery. Tell us about yourself and your journey to the work that you're doing now.
Sure. Well, I would say, grew up as a lawyer first. And so spent a number of years working with companies in crisis situations. And even before that, I worked on Wall Street with Goldman Sachs, and so was busy helping companies when they faced hostile takeovers. But I got used to helping companies in crisis situations. And then later on, I did it as a crisis communications leader in two different PR agencies in DC. And, David, this would be the full range of crises. So product recalls and data breaches and sexual harassment scandals and criminal indictments and class action litigation. But what I found was that companies would understand they needed to be brave during a crisis. But when it was over, they would revert to their safe status quo culture. So what I really work with leaders and teams and organizations on today is developing sustained bravery. Because to really outperform as a leader or an organization, you need to be steadily brave.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what does bravery mean to you, and what was your personal journey to get to this concept that you have of bravery?
Sure. So bravery to me means that you are brave in the face of fear and uncertainty and change. Because the deal is, we are all afraid. That's not some personal failing. That's not some unusual thing. We're all afraid. And really, bravery, and there's one of our astronauts, Buzz Aldrin, says bravery is the gradual accumulation of discipline. So it's a capability. And what that also says is all of us can be brave. You can be brave, I can be brave, anyone listening can be brave. And so my own journey was to really find out why I wanted to be brave. And in my case, I signed up to be a federal prosecutor where you every day are standing up for crime victims. And so I really put myself in a position where I had to be brave, but I wanted to be brave because it was so important to stand up for them and be their voice and also to guide them through the process of testifying in a criminal case, which is a very scary thing.
Yeah. So you're saying that people aren't necessarily born brave, but it can be developed.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I would say that there's bravery inside all of us, but it needs to be brought to life. It needs to be tapped. It needs to be energized and activated. And really, it needs to be practiced. And so, like so many things in life, but the more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it, and the better you are at being brave.
Yeah. So how do we, what's some practical steps in developing bravery if someone wants to get more brave?
Yeah. Well, I'd say that you have to create ideally kind of a little surround sound world where you are thinking about being brave and you're learning about it. You're modeling brave people you see around you, whether in your organization or someone on the who's who list. But you model them and you see what are they doing? How are they being brave? What can I copy of what they're doing? And then you surface the topic because most people don't wake up thinking about being brave. So it's a topic that we need to get comfortable with. And I think a lot of people also think, well, if I'm not brave, that means I'm a wimp or I'm timid or I'm a loser. And none of those things are true. It just means you haven't developed that capability yet. So if you think about it and talk about it, and then take brave action, which, by the way, doesn't mean to be something heroic. It makes sense to start in the shallow end of the pool and maybe with your floaties on and do it in, a small step. Maybe you ask someone for help. Maybe you suggest a better way to do something. But, start small so it will increase your confidence and get you ready to take bigger, brave steps.
Yeah. And also along the lines of being heroic, sometimes maybe that's what people think of. To be brave, it is a heroic act. And you're saying it's an everyday thing.
Yes, exactly right, David. Because I think that we grow up, I think, thinking about bravery as something that happens on the battlefield, or it's folks you read about who rush into to pull a driver out of a burning car, and those are all brave things. But that's not we don't kind of live by that gold standard and think, gosh, if I'm not doing those things, I'm not brave. No, small steps in your everyday work life are opportunities to be brave.
Yeah. And how do you apply this to our work lives and our organizations?
Yeah, well, see, this is where I think it's most important because, and I really focus on having organizations develop an enterprising culture. And an enterprising culture is one which is forward-looking and rewards curiosity and candor and risk-taking and reinvention. And people understand that if you're going to innovate and grow the company, you need all those things. And so they know, companies know they want those things, and they say they encourage, their employees to be all those things. But unless you're guiding them how to be brave and supporting them to be brave and empowering them to be brave, they won't they won't generally feel equipped and be ready to ask the hard questions and have the hard conversations and point out problems and suggest better solutions. So you have to create this enterprising culture through shared bravery.
Yeah. And so when people aren't being brave at work, it's not sharing new ideas, it's not speaking up about something that's wrong. What are the what happens when people aren't being brave?
Well, when they're not being brave, and I think this would, I'd say, be more typical at work, which is that people really kind of stick to themselves and they don't venture out of their comfort zone and they don't, and people know they, as you suggest, can spot something that's wrong, but they may be worried that if they put their hand in the air, it won't be received well. Or even if they aren't, quote unquote, punished for it, that, the organization isn't open to new ideas. And so either they'll feel they won't be heard, or that even if they, make the suggestion that nothing will happen.
Right. So, how can leaders encourage and foster this bravery in their staff?
Yeah, well, they have to surface the conversation first. They need to, bring up that bravery is something that they're working on personally and that they think is important for their team to really succeed and to outperform and also personally to feel proud about coming to work and be energized and excited. Because, my experience is, and I think for most people, when they look back at their lives, they are proudest of their moments when they were brave. And I think so to surface that conversation, to talk about how they can be brave and incorporate it into team meetings and say, kind of, how are we each being brave and how are we struggling to be brave and how are we having success being brave? And and so importantly too, to wrap your arms around every team member because if they're brave and they fail, that's fine too. That's part of the process. But I think if you, as a leader, create a world where you are talking about bravery and supporting your team being brave and then taking brave action. Bravery is not a spectator sport. You have to take brave action, and that will inspire you and your team as a leader to take more brave action.
Yeah. And you said something a moment ago that leaders need to share that they are working on being more or braver. And I mean that's there's some vulnerability there is, how does a leader be vulnerable and share that, they're also work on a journey to bravery.
Well, that's what I think everyone wants at work, right? Yes, they want to, on one level, look up to their leaders, but part of looking up to them is when they are real and they are saying, this is something that is important for me and for all of us, and it's important for our organization. And so let's have this conversation and let's connect up on this. And it's important also for the leader to say, I'm going to reward, brave action. And I'm going to reward, as I said, I'm going to support brave action which fails because I'm going to fail and you're going to fail, but we're going to end up in a better place when we are brave together.
Absolutely. And I think we both know that much success comes from a lot of failure, right?
That's right. That's right. That making mistakes is something that, is welcomed. I think, going back to your point about, how people can feel if they're not encouraged to be brave, they will worry about making a mistake. They'll worry about sharing their views. They'll, worry about bringing up a problem that they think their leader doesn't want to hear about. So that's why it's so important to open up this conversation about bravery and about, as you said, the vulnerability that's involved in being brave. But that's really the nature of bravery is that you take action in the face of fear and uncertainty and change.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of how a leader might celebrate bravery?
Yeah, the way I think that it's best to do it is first to start small and in those team meetings to, you know, share experiences of being brave and then really, have a small celebration when it happens. You say, we saw Jane last week in a conversation with the vendor really make progress. And Jane, tell us about that and how you felt and how it went. And then say, everybody, let's give a hand to Jane because that's a brave moment.
Yeah.
And by the way, ideally, you have, leaders at all levels celebrating bravery and, describing and honoring and uplifting employees who were brave again, whether they had a triumph or a train wreck, still celebrating their brave action.
Yeah. And are there misconceptions around bravery that hold us back or even hold our organizations back?
Yes, definitely. I'd say one is that bravery is something we can tap when we need it, and that's just not the case. Bravery is a skill, it's a capability, it's something that we practice and get better at. And so, just like playing the piano, playing a sport, you you succeed with practice, and you can't think that you can just say, "Great, put me down in front of the piano I played 10 years ago and I'll be able to play again now." Not true, right?
Right,
So
right.
bravery is something that needs regular practice. So that's one misconception. I would say another one that is that it's enough if the top leaders are brave. That if the top folks running the show are brave, then they can think that's good, that's enough. We can supply kind of the bravery that an organization needs. And as we've been talking about, David, to really succeed, an organization needs to have bravery occurring at all levels. And that's also, we know, a lot of the most innovative and successful efforts to drive a company occur at every different level. And you also don't know exactly where it's going to occur. So you have to create that environment where everyone feels ready and empowered and experienced in being brave.
Yeah. So you talked about just yeah, how it has to be developed, like you use the piano as an example, or an athlete needs to prepare. How do you develop it? How do you do that day to day? What's some practical steps that people can take?
Well, I say one fundamental step is to really hold up the mirror and ask, why do I want to be brave at work? And it's so important for a leader to ask that question because, as we talked about, bravery is not easy. Bravery can be unfamiliar for people. So you have to really land on why you want to do it. And, as I've described, I think there are great reasons to do it. Bravery is what makes you proud as a person. Bravery leads to unifying your team around, a brave vision. Bravery creates outperformance because the research shows that one of the key drivers for a company to outperform its competitors is having an enterprising culture, and having that culture leads to increased sales and a bigger market share and a higher stock price. So there are both personal and professional reasons why you should want to be brave, but it's something that you need to decide for yourself, right? Not what I might tell you or not what your boss might tell you, not what you might read in a book. What's the real motivation for you to be brave? And I think that's a central starting point. And then, as we talked about, you just need to get in the pool. It doesn't need to be some giant step. You as a leader could ask for help. One of the things we struggle for, as a leader, oftentimes we think, well, that'll show I'm weak if I ask for help. No, that will show you understand you're not an expert at everything, and that there are places where people can help you and you can help them, and that creates, an interconnection, which is important. So I would say bravery doesn't need perfection. Bravery needs action.
Yeah. And you just said the leader might need help, and sometimes that's a brave action asking for help, right?
Absolutely right. I mean, there's some that you asked about misconceptions. One that leaders can have is to think, now I'm supposed to be magical. Now I'm supposed to be able to have an answer for everything and to not need anyone else's assistance. And I'm supposed to kind of command and control how things occur. And those are all misconceptions. And that's not what your team needs. Your team needs you to be real with them and to help guide their careers and advance their projects and fine-tune their skills and lead them doing that in a brave way.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that I've met too many people that are perfect and don't need help from anybody.
Let me know when you find that person.
Yeah, but we're made to feel that way sometimes. Like, oh, I'm in charge now. I need to be perfect. I need to not show any limitations or anything like that.
Yeah, and if I can stay with that for a moment, I think there's a couple of paths that leaders can tend to take. One is to be super nice. And nice is nice, but nice isn't enough. And that's not what your team is looking for. They want honest feedback. They want, direction. They want to have a shared experience. And then the other one, kind of picking up on what we're talking about, is a more command and control model where I'm telling everybody what they need to do, and I'm going to micromanage it, and I'm going to hold information close, and it's going to be my show. And of course, that doesn't work either. And that's why using bravery as a guiding principle is so critical to energize your own leadership and rally your team to innovative and growth-oriented action.
Yeah. And yeah, the control and command and control model, you're right, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But there's still people that may try to do that. What is it that employees are looking for, in addition to what you've said, that, is not the command and control model?
Well, I think ideally they are looking for shared leadership and shared bravery. And I think they're looking for psychological safety so that they are free to put their hand in the air and to, point out when something is wrong and point out a better way to do something. And maybe stand up for a colleague who they think is being mistreated. I mean, there's so many different ways that people can be brave. And I think going back to what I said, what we all want, I think, is to feel proud of where we work and proud of what we're up to at work and proud of how we're interacting with our colleagues. And, as I said, nice is great. And a lot of, organizations will say, well, we have a really nice culture, but nice really isn't enough. People want more than that. They want the opportunity to grow and to, you know, have real conversations and to have honest conversations and to feel that they are part, of a bigger solution and that they're being listened to and heard.
Yeah. So you mentioned psychological safety. Describe that a little bit better for us. Like, what is that, and how do you get there?
Yeah, I think that's really just fostering a feeling that people can speak up without repercussion, that they can, have hard conversations, that and one of the things that I worked with, my team about at a firm most recently was that we're going to be brave with our clients and we're going to be brave with each other. And we all kind of signed up for that as part of the vision so that we would, point out when we were falling short and point out how we could do stuff better and have that as something that was, honored because we wanted to grow ourselves and we wanted to have our clients grow too. And if you do those two things together, that's really a magical formula.
Yeah. And a lot of what I talk about on this show is things like psychological safety. And
Mhm.
I talk about that we all have our unique strengths that come to us very naturally. And I think that we haven't talked about this yet, but being brave also could be being your authentic self and using your gifts and strengths. Because I know that in earlier when I was younger, I tried to be somebody I wasn't, and it didn't work
Yeah,
out very well. And I think
right.
part of bravery is actually being yourself and using your gifts that you've been given and letting other people use their gifts as well.
Absolutely, David. And if you as a leader create that kind of environment that says, we've put together on purpose a diverse team with diverse, perspectives, and we want to hear from everybody. And we know that will lead to a better, deeper conversation and to a better result. And so, yes, giving people the comfort and the support and the encouragement, as you said, to be themselves and to, bring all of themselves to work. That's the kind of environment I think people want to come to.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about in the beginning your various roles and how crisis management became part of that often. So how'd you decide to really focus there?
Well, I think actually this started early in my life. And I don't really know, I can't exactly pinpoint why, but people always seem to come to me, David, and say, tell me what I should do in this situation. And, tell me about how I sort out this relationship issue, or tell me how I can find a new job that I like, or whatever. I just became an advisor. And then over time, the stakes increased because I became an advisor to Fortune 500 companies and to other organizations. And, I did find that I had an ability to stay calm during crisis situations. And I think that was also because I was practicing it. And I knew too that that's what, organizations and executives want. They want a reassurance that you understand what they're going through and that you have a path that you can suggest to them and help lead them on that will lead them through and past the crisis. And ideally, too, help recover from the crisis so that they're on a stronger footing going forward.
Yeah. So Jim, you've written a book. Tell us about it. The Instant Survivor: Right Ways to Respond When Things Go Wrong.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you how that came up, which was I ran for statewide political office. It was, as they call it, an incomplete success, meaning that I lost.
Okay.
And at the end of that, I didn't have a job and I had cut into our savings. So I was facing a crisis then. And I managed to get through it by really relying on a lot of the crisis management work that I'd done with organizations and followed their crisis management planning and training and principles and recovery. And so after kind of using a lot of the same formula that worked for companies and having it work for me, I really thought I should share this with people. And so I developed a four-step formula and I wrote my book about that and had the great opportunity, David, to talk to people, successful people who managed to come through their own professional and personal crises by standing brave. Robin Roberts, the Good Morning America anchor, and Tito Francona, the Boston Red Sox manager, Diane Rehm, the NPR host, just a lot of different people who really brought to life a lot of these principles.
Yeah. So what are the four steps?
So the four steps are number one, to stay frosty. And
Okay.
stay frosty because that's a little spin on stay cool, but it's something that we're often told, right? Be cool, keep your emotions in check. But the way to really do that is to develop a crisis management plan in advance that you can call on and work from when a crisis occurs. So that's something that I recommend. The second is to secure support. And this is something that smart companies do, but smart people do it as well, so that they have an extended network of family and friends and others who they can call on, who can, provide a bigger span of vision and not be so caught up in the situation and can, provide good advice. So step two is to secure support. The third I call stand tall, and really that means to take control of the crisis because the natural thing can be to kind of go into a shell and to be reactive to a situation. But in order to really take charge, you need to see what the problem is and develop a path forward and take action to help set you on that path. The last thing I called save your future. And what that means is that you shouldn't wait for a crisis. to get into action. You can do an audit of your life, your finances, your relationships, your health, your situation at work. Do a kind of life audit and see, where am I setting up well, and where am I struggling, and how can I improve so that these areas of my life won't create a crisis.
Yeah. Any further advice on doing that audit?
Well, I think when I mention audit, people might think, oh my God, is this days or months? No, it's not. You can do it in under 2 hours. And the key is to the key is to be honest with yourself and to hold up the mirror and to, for example, at work, ask, well, okay, so how long have I been here? Am I getting promoted? If I'm not, why is that happening? Am I included in on important meetings? Am I getting good performance reviews? Have I developed good relationships within the company? Just a lot of different things to kind of sort through to see where you stand. And then also really to hold up the mirror and say, am I happy here? Have I picked, a job that I like? Have I picked a career that I like? And if not, so many people do, you can make a move, but then you can start to think, how can I do it in a way that I control, whether it's moonlighting or whether it's taking education, to move into a different space.
Yeah. And is there any frequency to it, or is it just it's very individual?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it kind of depends on what's going on in your life. I would say at least once a year, but if things are a little more turbulent, maybe twice a year.
Okay. And we're talking about when things go wrong. Is resilience related to all this, and is it something that we develop like bravery?
It is, yes. But I think too, like bravery, it's something we, as you suggest, David, we practice. And it's also something now that we should be getting ready for. I mean, just for example, when we had we're doing crisis work for an organization, which was in the middle of it, we would also have one person on the team whose focus was on crisis recovery. What could the company do to improve its relationships, to comply with regulations that are enforced? What are the steps that will make the company stronger and less likely to face a crisis in the future? And that makes it more resilient. And so we can do that, as leaders too, to look around and see, how do things stack up, and where are we, at risk of not getting the job done, and where are we at the risk of outside scrutiny, and really getting ready for that. And we can do it as individuals too in our own lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jim, this has been a great conversation. I know I've learned a lot. Is there
Thank you.
anything else that you want to add?
No, I would just say that I care deeply about this, so that if your listeners want to have me come speak to their organization about how to be brave, how to create an enterprising culture, how to be create a culture that will make all of you more proud and happy to be at work, then I'd look forward to doing that. And I can be reached, through my website. My contact information is on LinkedIn. The only thing I might remind people is that the spelling of my last name, Moorhead, has two O's and no E in the middle because
Okay.
it's often misspelled.
Okay. Yeah, I will put that in the show notes, both your website and your LinkedIn.
Sure, great.
All right, Jim. Thanks again. This has been great.
Fantastic, David. Such a pleasure to talk to you, and I appreciate your great questions.
Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you. I hope you take the time to explore other episodes and learn from other amazing guests. Remember, if you're interested in getting to know yourself better, there is now a free Type Finder personality assessment on the Quiet and Strong website. This free assessment will give you a brief report, including the four-letter Myers-Briggs code. I'll add a link in the show notes. And I'd love to connect with you. Reach out at david@quietandstrong.com or check out the quietandstrong.com website, which includes blog posts and links to social media for Quiet and Strong and much more. Send me topics or guests you would like to see on the show. So many great things about being an introvert, and so we need those to be understood. Get to know your introverted strengths and needs and be strong.